Hello, BookTube. It's Poetry Thursday, and what I have reliably been informed is Poetry Month. National Poetry Month and Poetry Thursday. If that's not enough of a call for more of you to pull poetry off your shelf and read it to me, I don't know what is. As of now, there are only a few of us booktubers doing that. There's your precious Aaron Facer. There's also David Wiley, who just today did a poem. I will link to him, and I'm sure that by the time this video goes up, your precious Aaron Facer will also have a Poetry Thursday. I'll link to that as well. Certainly we should show a kind of fellowship. But David Wiley read a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, which is always a joy to hear. Longfellow was the world's most famous poet. He was America's best-known poet. He generated wealth from his poetry, and the reason he did that is because he wrote poetry that everybody loved to hear, that everybody loved to read, that everybody loved to memorize and say to each other, which is the role that poetry had for the 8,000 years before the Beats got their hand on it. And I figured, well, if David Wiley can read a Longfellow poem too, then so can I. So I have returned to the Norton Anthology of Poetry. And they have a nice selection of Longfellow, and I found one. Now, the thing about Longfellow is that he can go on a bit. he had the knack for end rhymes, and he had a very good ear for which particular words will fit the rhythm of a sentence to make an end rhyme possible. The knack there is vocabulary. There are plenty of great, super smart writers who aren't good with vocabulary. Vocabulary is not, despite what people say about the huge number of new words coined in, for instance, the collected works of Shakespeare, it's not a mark of intelligence. It's a mark of memory. It's how good your memory is. You're exposed to these words. Do you remember them? That's how big your vocabulary is, and Longfellow never forgot anything, never at all. Unfortunately, that was the source of a lot of the tragedy in his life, is that he never forgot anything. But we've got a poem here. The only reason I preface that is because it's a little bit longer than a ditty. It's The Fire of Driftwood, and it's inscribed with a location, Devereux Farm, near Marblehead. Marblehead is a part of Massachusetts that you really should see if you ever spend any time in Massachusetts, because parts of it are unbelievably lovely. And this is the poem. This is The Fire of Driftwood. We sat within the farmhouse old, whose windows, looking o'er the bay, gave to the sea breeze, damp and cold, an easy entrance, night and day. Not far away we saw the port, the strange, old-fashioned, silent town, the lighthouse, the dismantled fort, the wooden houses, quaint and brown. We sat and talked until the night, descending, filled the little room. Our faces faded from the sight. Our voices only broke the gloom, which is what used to happen, right, when you had one gas lamp on the table. The gloom, shadows would start to encroach from everywhere in the room until they were mostly the room. But I won't interrupt. We spake of many a vanished scene, of what we'd once thought and said, of what had been and what might have been, of who was changed and who was dead. And all that fills the hearts of friends when first they feel with secret pain their lives henceforth have separate ends and never can be one again. The first slight swerving of the heart that words are powerless to express and leave it still unsaid in part or say it in too great excess. The very tones in which we spake had something strange I could but mark. The leaves of memory seemed to make a mournful rustling in the dark. I'm not going to interrupt. This is lovely. This is lovely stuff. This is what beautiful poetry looks like. Oft died the words upon our lips, as suddenly from out the fire, built of the wreck of stranded ships, the flames would leap and then expire. And as their splendor flashed and failed, we thought of wrecks upon the main, of ships dismasted that were hailed and sent no answer back again. The windows rattling in their frames, the ocean roaring up the beach, the gusty blast, the bickering flames, all mingled vaguely in our speech, until they themselves, a part of fancies floating through the brain, the long-lost ventures of the heart that send no answers back again. O flames that glowed, O hearts that yearned, they were indeed too much akin, the driftwood fire without that burned, the thoughts that burned and glowed within. And that is from 1849, and Longfellow touched it up just a little in 1850 and published it again. And there's some things that it does. There are a great many things that it does intentionally. It's a beautiful poem intentionally. And it does one of the things that I mention over and over again on our poetry readings that I love when poetry does, which is to capture something that prose doesn't capture. that is real and that people feel, but that only poetry seems to be able to capture perfectly. But I want to point out, it does a lot of things inadvertently too. This is about being in a comfortable room in Marblehead or Nahant or anywhere on the Massachusetts seacoast, and it captures what that was like before the modern era. Our window panes tend not to rattle in strong breezes now. They tend to be, I've got these modern newfangled things on the windows here. The house is 100 years old, but the windows are 1 year old, and they don't rattle in their frames at all. I've had windows that did, and I'm sure you have too. That business about the shadows encroaching from all the corners of the room until you can barely see the people in the room, that is entirely true. That used to happen when you had one candle, two candles on a mantelpiece, maybe one gas lamp, one oil lamp. And also that bit about fugitive flames and noises from a guttering fire. I don't know how many of you use a fireplace, use an active fireplace, but they have a nature of their own. They very much are another person in the room, and they change and shift and get a little bit more opinionated as they get old. So that at the end, you've got fugitive little bursts, odd shadows, dancing as the fire finds all the pockets of what's left in the fireplace and casts these shadows all over the room, and that light show gets more enjoyable, more strange as the shadows darken. All of that stuff is captured perfectly in these verses, and Longfellow didn't know that he was capturing something that would be completely gone. That's completely gone. The evening that he's describing was experienced by lots and lots and lots of people. It was the standard evening with friends. But it's the friendship part that this poem does so beautifully. It captures something about friendship that you almost never see. You almost never see it captured so well. And that is, what did we say here? The first slight swerving of the heart. Where friends are not having an argument. They're not fighting. They still call themselves deepest bosom friends. But the paths of their lives are broadening away from each other. And there's nothing you can do about that. That is purely organic. That just happens. Some people beat themselves up and say that means they're being a bad friend or that the other person is being a bad friend. But sometimes that is completely organic. It's completely natural. And Longfellow gives the two options: to leave it said, still unsaid in part, or to say it with too great excess. I've seen that happen. It's happened to me. And believe you me, believe you me, I was socialized by a species that does friendship right. Unlike stupid primates that fling their own poop. I was socialized by a species that does friendship right. And I was socialized by a species that does not experience what Longfellow is describing here. Humans do it. But there is no such thing as dogs growing apart. That doesn't happen. And I was taught that kind of friendship, so I'm kind of resistant to it myself. It usually happens to me instead of being done by me. Oh, God. Sorry. There's lots of laundry being done here, but I'm trusting you can hear me. That is the thing on its dying death throes. That means I'm going to go and pay it attention. But that's all I wanted to say about this poem anyway, is that it does, the thing that it does wonderfully is to capture that evanescent, that vanishing half-truth that we all know, we've all experienced it, but poetry captures it better than anything else. And I also wanted to point out that the details here would have been immediately familiar. The background noise to the point that no one would even thought to talk about them. It's a poet who captures them, and even when Longfellow isn't trying, he's brilliant, because he captures them perfectly. This is the world that he lived in. This is the world that most humans lived in until just about 50 years ago. This is, for instance, Theodore Roosevelt. This is the world that he lived in. Oh, God. That's fairly noticeable. So I'll wrap up this Poetry Thursday to the sound of galloping horse feet. But I'll be back. We'll do some other poem tomorrow when it will be quieter. Thank you, BookTube.